languages taught in any school that taught languages. In 1903, this law was reinforced when they required all schools to include German in their list of languages. In 1916, during the centennial celebration, by the way, Indiana was the first state to have a formal centennial celebration. One of the people that was lauded was Richard Lieber for founding our state park system. Now, on the downside, just a year later, Indiana outlawed the teaching of German in response to World War I. Now, they did it after the war was over, so I've never quite figured that one out. But so let's jump to a happier time. In the early 2000s, the Indiana State Fair came up with a new plan to dedicate one of their exhibit halls to an international display celebrating a different country each year. This would kick off in 2011 with Germany being the initial host country. The Fair Board approached IGHS in late 2009 and asked them to help to develop a display on German culture and its impact on Indiana. We still have parts of it stored upstairs. The board had jumped on the idea and started to generate ideas about what we could do. One of the suggestions was a cookbook. Foolishly, I agreed to take that one on. And since my daughter Carrie has been cooking since an early age and just happened to be teaching in the culinary program at Ivy Tech, I drafted her on. And she apologizes, but she's got a play date with her daughter today that she couldn't move. So anyway, we started collecting recipes, and we started off by running notices in the IGHS newsletter. I sent emails out to everybody I could think of and asking them to submit their favorite family recipes. And people really did. We received well over 100 recipes. And oddly enough, fully 1/4 of all of those recipes were for the same dish. German potato salad. Now, the German potato salad is a dish made from boiled potatoes and some sort of sweet and sour dressing, usually consisting of a mixture of oil, vinegar, and herbs. It's generally believed to have been created in Germany and been spread throughout Europe, the United States, and beyond by German immigrants during the 19th century. Here's what the basic recipe looks like. Now, you'll notice that there's one ingredient kind of sticking out there. Since it's a sweet and sour dish, it's very important to have sugar or a sweetener in it of some time. This is where things got complicated. The submissions I received ranged from 1 tablespoon to over 2 cups, assuming same serving types. Yeah, now this is where I have to make a personal admission and my first editorial decision. I'm diabetic. I was not going to kill myself trying all of these recipes. So I cut out anything over a cup of sugar. I also decided to set the sweetness level at the level my family liked it. My book, I can set the levels. Which book? No, even worse, even worse. It's the amount of sweetener. It doesn't matter what source it comes from. And Splenda does not work well in potato salad. But we set it at 1/2 cup. My family uses, well, we used to use brown sugar. Now you use the brown color white sugar because brown sugar used to have more flavor. But anyway, we set it for that. I did include the suggestion in the cookbook that we recommended people to make the recipe as written the first time they make it. After that, you're free to adjust it up and down, however the family likes it. And got pretty good response from that. Now, there is one recipe in this book that really stands out for me. Quite a number of people send in spring early recipes. These are a very traditional Christmas cookie, which dates back to the 14th century. The name loosely translates as little knight or little jumper. But the recipes all contain about the same thing: sugar, flour, eggs, butter, and then anise extract. But my favorite recipe came from a 95-year-old man in Evansville, whose Oma, his grandmother, used to make them and sell them to the riverboatmen on the Ohio River. That's the recipe he gave me. She made this so often, all she listed was all the ingredients. She didn't have any amounts on there because she knew it by feel, which I thought was adorable. But the other thing that caught my eye is down the bottom, anise seed. And the instructions he gave me is when you're making them, you make the dough, no flavoring in it, and then you sprinkle the seeds on the cookie sheet, put the cookie dough on the cookie sheet, cover it, and let it sit overnight. It absorbs the fumes and creates a very mild anise-flavored cookie, which people that swear that they don't like anise cookies love. So it just caught my attention. I really liked it. And she also added a little grated orange rind, which I thought added to the flavor. So this is the recipe we went with. Now, I probably should have mentioned at the beginning that the cookbook is called German Cooking Hoosier Style, not Hoosier German Cooking. And the Hoosier style in this case refers to the way these traditional recipes have been adapted to use locally available ingredients. And I think we can all agree that food is one of the basic tenets of any culture. So when the Germans immigrated to Indiana, they brought with them their recipes and their traditions that they had grown up with. But whenever two or more ethnic groups come in contact with each other, whenever groups move to an entirely new environment, traditional recipes almost are forced to change. Sometimes it's the ingredients, sometimes it's the seasonings, sometimes it's just the presentation as they absorb their new surroundings. Now let's think about that for a moment. When you move to a new country, halfway around the world, especially in the 19th century, there are a lot of unknowns and unanswered questions about how life is going to change. I'm pulling together a book that includes a remembrance of a family story when they immigrated to the US in the 1840s. In it, one of the young girls wonders aloud whether there will be music in their new home in Indiana. It just shows you how little information they had and how much question they had about how much the world was going to change. And there is one classic recipe that I think shows how these traditional recipes change when they come up against a new environment. And this particular one, the recipe itself doesn't much change as the presentation maybe is Americanized. Wiener Schnitzel, which actually is what I had for dinner last night, or as we know it around here, the Hoosier tenderloin. Wiener Schnitzel is a breaded and fried veal cutlet. A tenderloin is a sandwich consisting of a breaded and fried pork cutlet that's served on a bun of some sort. Now, when you look at the recipes, there's not much difference there. The only two things that change is there's a exchange in meat. I'll get to that in a minute. And then the presentation. Europe, especially in the 19th century, was more established, more formal. Um, so, you know, sit-down meals for a hot meal were fairly common. Indiana in the 1840s especially was on the Wild West frontier, so things were a lot rougher and coarser. So, you know, maybe a sandwich is easier to handle than a sit-down meal. But, okay, I can buy that concept, but why the change in meat? Well, as I said, when you arrive in a new place, some things are the same, some things are different. In Indianapolis, there was one important difference. Middle of the 19th century, Indianapolis was the fourth largest hog butchery site in the country. And in the years immediately after the Civil War, the famous preacher Henry Ward Beecher, the younger brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, wrote to a friend about his experiences of living in Indianapolis. During my residence in Indianapolis, everyone kept pigs and everyone kept them in the streets. Governor Noble presented me with a pair of, and within 2 years, I found myself the owner of a herd of about 30 of these children of the streets, and were not of good conduct. At the time, pork was exceedingly cheap here in town. So I don't think it's too big of a surprise that, you know, rather than tracking down and locating a more expensive veal, they switched it to pork. Same recipe, virtually the same seasonings, and they created a very similar sandwich, which obviously has been successful since there are 13 places in the state right now that all claim to have the best tenderloin in the state.
Only 3?
13 that I have found on their web pages. Okay, going back to the book. The one thing I was not prepared for when I volunteered for this was how much work it is to compile a cookbook. Collecting the recipes was easy, but testing and editing those recipes was far more time consuming than I had planned. We received over 130 submissions from IGHS members, plus about 20 more than I drew from our own family recipes. This brings me to my second editorial decision. I don't like fish. So any recipe calling for fish did not make it into the final book. So it's nothing personal, just I've never developed a taste for it. And I was frightened at an early age by the smoked eels standing up in the front window of the butcher's. So those recipes got cut real quickly. That still left us with nearly 100 recipes to test. And for 2 months, I made every recipe at least twice. Some of them were repeated 4 or 5 times. There were 1 or 2 that actually went through more. Carrie, who was teaching in the culinary program at Ivy Tech, handled the pastries and I dealt with the rest. Now, one aside is Carrie's Linzer torte is one of the best I have ever eaten. So it was a lot of work, but we ate them. Finally, we settled on 76 recipes that made it into the book. Now, we needed photographs for this book. And a friend of Carrie's, Sarah Nunnery, had just graduated from the Ivy Tech photography program. So we drafted her to do the illustrations. And this is where the real work began. On the day we had set for the photo session, I was up and cooking by 5 o'clock. During that one 14-hour day, Carrie, Tyler Hodges, another volunteer from the culinary program, and I made 18 of the recipes while Sarah snapped pictures as we worked. I can honestly say it is the only time in my life that I have literally dirtied every dish, pan, bowl, and spoon in the house. I think there were 7 dishwasher runs that day. We had 2 problems that day. One is Sarah and Tyler hadn't eaten before they came. So they were both hungry and they kept sampling damn food. Toward the end of the day, we had to get very creative on the posing for the pictures. The other problem is my family has always had cats. One of which, sorry, one picture. There it is. That's Toby. He's my 15-pound gray. He's actually 21 years old now. But he was fascinated by all the activity in the kitchen and he wanted to help. So he was constantly underfoot, constantly in the way. So finally, we just had to toss him outside. But that didn't solve the problem. He moved from window to window, supervising the process. Sarah finally decided he was cute and moved a couple of the items and set up some pictures, specifically with Toby inspecting the food. And we loved the shot and decided to use one of them for the cover. Now, the funny thing is when Carrie took a mock-up of the book to the culinary program at Ivy Tech to get feedback from the chefs, they loved the cookbook. But you absolutely cannot put a cat on the cover of a cookbook. Well, they're wrong. You can, and I have got orphans and ahs walking up and seeing Toby, and then they pick up the book and then we sell it. So he is responsible for a good portion of our sales. Now, following the book's release at the Indiana State Fair, see, I do water back every now and then. Carrie and I did several dozen cooking demonstrations. We did them at the fair. We also did a number of them around the state, pitching the book and collecting feedback. And from these demonstrations, we got the comments from people that the book doesn't lie flat on the counter while they're cooking. So when we got ready for a second edition, we went to spiral bound, so it'll lie flat on your kitchen counter. So I guess we did something right because to date we have sold over 2,000 copies of this book. So it's up there in the high rankings of successful books for NCSA literature. Now, before my voice gives out, I would like to mention one other cookbook that we've published. This is a reprint of a little cookbook called Operation Vittles. It was published in 1949 by the American officers' wives in blockaded Berlin. It was done during the Berlin airlift, and for those of you that slept through history class this time, at the end of World War II, the Allies divided Germany and the German capital into different zones, with Great Britain, France, and the United States each controlling one sector, and Russia controlling the eastern sector. This is what we used to call East Germany. Berlin was divided in the same manner, and it was, in effect, an island floating in the middle of East Germany. Now, in 1948, the Russians were not particularly fond of this plan, so they cut off all land and sea access to Berlin, trying to starve the city out and get the Allies out. The U.S. responded by building an air bridge with planes carrying supplies to the city in an endless stream. It kept us up nonstop for over 18 months, with a plane landing every 3 minutes for 18 months. To this day, the Berlin airlift is still cited as the #1 reason for the American-German friendship. Now, Operation Vittles is a cute little book. It's a collection of nearly 100 delightful recipes. For each one, you get the name of the person that submitted the recipe. There are a lot of little cute drawings, and at the top of the page, there is a short snippet talking about what life was like during the airlift. I particularly like this one. And actually, if you can see the recipe for this blockade, 2 cans of fruit cocktail, 1 cup of sugar, 2 bottles of cognac, 6 bottles of red wine, 6 bottles of white wine, 6 bottles of champagne, serve 6. One last mention about the Berlin airlift. During the airlift, the pilots would drop basically Hershey bars tied on little handkerchief parachutes, and they would drop them as they came in for a landing. One 10-year-old boy in Berlin at the time who was constantly trying to catch one of these candy bombs was named Jörg Stachel. After the war, he immigrated to this country, joined the U.S. Army, and for 20 years was the commandant of Camp Adamberg here in Indiana. He agreed to do the foreword for our reprint of this edition. So those are our 2 cookbooks to date. So if anybody has moved to do another one, Jeanette, we'd love to talk to you about it. So thank you very much.
Any questions for Steve? We have a little bit of time before our next presentation.
So what's your favorite recipe?
Number 1 question, did you bring samples?
No, I brought copies of the cookbook for you to buy.
No samples.
I ate them for breakfast, I'm sorry.
What was your favorite recipe out of all?
Oh, the spring rolls, without a doubt. Now, the bread in there, the German potato salad, I have made dozens of times, probably more than that. But just the story behind the grandma's spring rolls and the alternative recipe, the older style of recipe, I just absolutely love. Plus the cookies are good. But I am very much ashamed that I had a computer crash 10 years ago, and I do not have the man's name anymore, so I don't remember who it was that donated. But yeah, no, without a doubt, that's my favorite.
In Germany, of course, there's the Wiener Schnitzel, which is made with veal, but there's also the Schweineschnitzel,
Yeah.
which is the same thing, flattened, but
Yeah,
made with pork. And of course, pork is a big deal
yeah, in Germany too, so.
Could it be that it didn't evolve necessarily from the Wiener Schnitzel, but from the German version of the Schweineschnitzel?
It's very possible. I have not taken a chance to dig through and see what the earliest recipe we can find for the pork version is, because there are a lot of early ones in the US, but I've not looked to see how early it dates back in Germany.
You said that there were 12 places in Indiana that couldn't have the best.
Yeah, 13.
13, sorry. Was there unanimous agreement that where it was founded up in Huntington? There's a place up there that said they had the first best.
Actually, I wasn't looking for that. I was just looking for best tenderloin in Indiana. And
My brothers and I go out 3 times a year, 2 or 3 times a year looking for the best tenderloin.
I did see a thing on Facebook the other day about the largest tenderloin roll, and it's served with 2 buns. So I'm assuming that's a small one.
Now, also, is Indiana, I've heard that Indiana, maybe Iowa have the only tenderloins in the country.
I believe that is correct. I'm not positive, but
And there is referring to what he said, there's a place in Huntington that claims to be the
Yeah.
origin.
I have heard that, but like I said, I don't know for certain, but Gee, I'll have to sample and see if it's worth it.
So you mentioned you had several recipes in your family. Did it come down through your mom or dad's side, or how did?
My dad's side, my mother's English. And actually the bread recipe that's in there, it's a farmer's bread, comes from, my family is idiotic, is everybody is aunt or uncle, doesn't matter what the relations is. So my aunt Lizzie, who's actually my cousin's wife, is the one that taught me that recipe. And I make it fairly frequently because I can't stand American wheat bread. As Julia Child said, how can a country expect to be great when their national bread tastes like wet tissue paper? She may have done French cooking, but she got that right. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Sir.
Sorry, but fish is, of course, an important thing for those of us particularly out north of Germany. We should probably do an addendum kind of volume that has some of those fish.
You are welcome to, sir.
But I would need help. What were some of the fish recipes? Do you remember any of those? And did they possibly include the famous Southern Indiana fiddler, which is, of course, the catfish?
I honestly don't remember. I took one look at it and said, nope. I'm serious. I don't
That'd be
like fish.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see.
I'm with you, Steve. My brother and I were fishing.
Yeah, well, I don't eat fish.
I was sitting next to Nicole last night at dinner, and we were talking. She's with me. She does not like fish. Her husband is a pescatarian. Pescatarian, thank you. Yeah, he eats only fish. So I don't know how that marriage works.
So I'm gonna ask Giles here, what's the derivation of fiddler? Is that what a big thing back home?
Yeah, we asked about that down there when we were working with the Jasper folks. And the fiddler, and Norbert may respond to that too, the fish, when it sits in the water, does this, the fins, maybe the side fins, and it looks like a feedlot, a Fehlspieler. And that's where we think that came from. Others, Martina Eckert, the actor down in Jasper, who really was an excellent source for information about the culture and folklore of the Du Bois County, southern Indiana area. And she agreed that that was likely the source of the fiedler idea. But then they have some rather unique recipes for the catfish, filleted and otherwise.
My wife will try them all.
I'm particularly fond of fish and particularly fond of catfish, owl as we call them. And so it would be interesting do you still have those recipes from the?
No, I don't. Like I said, I love it. The internet, you go to a computer and computer crash.
You've seen those.
I have them in scraps of paper.
What about frog legs in, or turtle soup?
That's another, those are
Turtle soup, yeah.
Yeah. If it's wet, I don't eat it.
Yeah.
crawled out of the lake, you didn't.
Yeah.
Church, it's on toilet.
I take church picnics, so,
The turtle soup.
Turtle soup.
Turtle soup, yeah.
Yeah, in Grand Cayman, there is a wonderful visitor center. It's a turtle rescue center that you can go in and see that the sea turtles that they've rescued, that they're breeding to re-release. And then as you're going out, you can stop at a restaurant and have turtle soup.
Yay.
Yeah, not the marketing idea they're trying to do, so.
Turtle soup, because you eat that for lunch.
Number one, prominently available fish in Germany at least was herring.
Mhm.
And that is something you can't even replicate here because it's not found in local waters. So that may have
It
been
works for
one
me.
reason for the lack of, which please keep my fish recipes.
Yeah, herring,
But herring in Germany, that's very popular. Yes, you do.
we used to get herring in kegs. My grandfather would get these, it came from Magdeburg. We'd get the kegs of herring from the North Sea, this is upstate New York.
Mhm.
And I remember helping him, it was soaked in brine and it still had also what we call the niche, which was eye of eggs. And with my grandmother then would turn that into this, would marinate this, it was already brine. And boy, was that good to make
It's the
bread.
only sea fish that in Germany you can transport without refrigeration. So of course it's the only,
Yeah,
so that's the explanation for this.
well, that's why it's brine. when they-
Yeah, absolutely. Other fish have lots of other recipes, but they're local and they're locally caught.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference. Yeah, exactly. But herring, because it's a sea, and that he drove the Atlantic trade and Atlantic movement for a very long time. That was the one you could transport because it was brine or salted or whatever, into otherwise landlocked areas of Germany.
Well, when every time we go, visit our friends in Bremen, that's the first thing we go out, and
Yeah.
they have these wonderful fish restaurants out in like Bremerhaven, so on along the coast, where they bring the fresh fish in. And another one, is eel. My wife is on smoked eel, my grandfather loved that. And that, it's just, it is oily, but it is delicious, you gotta eat around the bone, but it's so
Do you at least regret that you carelessly pitched all these recipes?
Not in the least, because I wasn't gonna publish one I hadn't tried. I'm still a little worried that the only thing everybody's taking away from this is I don't want to fish.
Are we waiting for other recipes?
Yeah, that was a yeoman's job. That book was so fun. That's just great.
We have a lot of fun with it, so, especially with Toby. He became quite a star with that. So.
Any more questions for Steve?